Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome back again to the NPTEL online certification course on research methodology for planning and architectural studies. So far we have discussed about several aspects of our research design, the survey, particularly the way you can collect the information, the secondary data collection, primary survey, and mostly the data and information that are required to do the analysis for your intended research purpose. But many a times, like whatever you collect from the field as a raw form or whatever the data you collected from secondary sources, they are not really formatted, or they are not really in a particular desired format which you can directly use for your analysis. So for that you need to process the data, you need to remove such kind of missing data, or maybe the data which are not reliable or the data which are inconsistent, so that you finally get a defined and refined data set for your analysis. So taking that particular aim in mind, today we will be discussing about that important topic of processing of data and database management as our lecture title 31. So in this particular lecture, what we are going to learn? We are going to learn about processing of data, then different stages of that, and then there are certain problems in data processing. So with that definitely we will get certain kind of idea that what to do once we collect the information from the primary survey or maybe from some secondary sources. Now processing of the data in this case, pictorially if you see that you may have huge amount of information, something from maybe the web, something from certain kind of survey, something from social media, something from video, etc. And all of them are needed in some way or other for your research, and then it is like to process it. So in this case, definitely when you put all this information, so the proper segregation, proper classification, and then putting into a typical file format is required. So in this case, if you see that the data are processed, it is sorted, and then finally in terms of Word document, in terms of video content or PDF, so proper storage is required of those information, and also it should be tabulated, it should be compiled the way it is required for analysis purpose. Maybe certain software that you are going to use for your study requires certain input file, which is not typically probably a Word file or a Excel file. Maybe in that case we have to insert the value there itself, or else there is something called some software they are asking that you can upload your data tabulated in Excel, but you make it the comma separated file like .csv file, and then you can do that. If you are using certain programming language, there is some kind of command which can read certain data type, it may be .dat or maybe like it all depends on the requirement of the software, the analysis tool that you are going to use. So the main point is that the collected information or the data is raw and must be converted into suitable form of this particular data for required analysis. Result gets affected highly by form of representing the data. So, if there is some kind of error in your data, that obviously sometimes will impact your results. Sometimes if there is some missing component and all, and you try to analyze with the software, it will not properly run, or maybe in such cases will give some distorted result, and this will be very difficult then to represent. Appropriate data processing is essential to obtain reliable results, because that is something, the data, the input that you are giving is in a proper and required format. So, processing of data enables researcher to analyze information and derive insight, and also it is facilitating the informed decision making. So, if your data is itself is erroneous, if the collected information is not well organized, and you analyze something, so then that decision or that outcome, if it is something like there is no outcome coming because of the error, the system is showing certain error, this is one. But even if it is giving some of the outcome out of your information without making this organized or defined, so then that is also a wrong thing. So, for a informed decision making, we have to really process the data, we have to refine the data in interest of that analysis. Now, the common stages of processing the data. So, in this case, stages of data processing are guided by the plan of data analysis, which is normally decided before the data collection. It started with the questionnaire checking, editing, coding of data, classification of data, tabulation of that required information in a particular format. Representation of data is very important, which will make things clear to the reader and researcher as well to interpret. Then cleaning of data, and then adjusting if required. Now, questionnaire checking. This is undertaken during the data collection, which involves the examination of completeness and interviewing quality. So, this can be done in two phases. Like, first check, definitely when you go for a pilot survey with your set of questions, and also you have given training to the surveyor, or you yourself are going to interview. So, during that pilot and that process, you will come to know that few difficulties in some of the questions, or maybe in the way the dialogue is happening, there is certain ambiguity with certain kind of component of a questions which is not clear. So, there is a chance that you can rectify, and that can be omitted in your final questionnaire. But again, in that case, definitely it will depend on two aspects. First, probably the respondent initially willing to take part in that particular survey, but after filling 2-3 questions decide not to go on and then leave it in between. So, then that particular questionnaire is becoming incomplete, and if we take that into our database, then some of the questions are unanswered. Other point is that interviewing quality. Suppose who are doing the survey, depending on their throwing of the questions or something, so the answer may also differ. So, we have to assure that this thing very carefully, that there should not be any such influence of the surveyor on the respondent. A questionnaire should not be accepted if partially or fully incomplete. So, whenever you get all the information, so either you have collected it like say for example, you have collected it through online survey. So, whenever it is online, so you can always like see those kind of things are stored in a particular spreadsheet, and then you can check if there is blank somewhere, and if it is not intended to be the blank space, you can identify those and you can remove it. If by mistakes the same responses are stored twice, so duplicate responses, that also you can select and remove. And in such cases, like definitely there will be other few options. Suppose you have done this particular exercise offline, and now you are entering it to a particular spreadsheet. During that entering process, you will find that some of the questionnaire are not completed. So, you can segregate and you do not take that data into your database. Other, the respondent is having inadequate knowledge and does not qualify. Suppose you find that okay, this is something where the questionnaire is being answered, but finally that is not the user group or that person, and then looking at the responses you find that okay, it is not really a good response, and then it's abruptly done and randomly, that respondent had picked up certain options, so you can discard it. Responses indicates that respondent could not understand the question, because many a times, in the questionnaire we used to give some cross questioning thing, so that you can understand that okay, whether that respondent is filling up the questionnaire carefully or it is just a random thing. Say for example, if my intent to understand that about the importance of the income in decision making to select like some kind of options, like go for a AC bus or AC taxi or a normal taxi or a normal bus. In such cases, if you have some kind of questions on that, okay, the cost I don't consider, and later on whenever cost related questions will come, and then you will find that someone is considering the least cost and compromise all the quality. So that means there is ambiguity in the thought process that okay, obviously the decision making criteria is the cost, even if that respondent has mentioned somewhere that the cost is not a factor to be considered. After that, next stage is editing. In this case, process of examining the raw data and detect the errors, omissions and correct them. So, if something is to be corrected, that it is by mistakes, it is something, some error. Okay, normally this kind of errors happening when you have a offline data collection and then you are trying to enter it. So, there might be obvious error and then you can correct it. Assures the data is accurate, consistent and uniformly entered, and also complete and well arranged for further stage of coding and tabulation. Two kind of editing can take place. One is field editing, which can be completed in the stage during the recording of responses, say for example some kind of abbreviated or illegible form. Other one is the central editing, where it is to be done where editing of all forms to align in a standardized form. So, if there is some sort of transformation to certain kind of value, so it is something like I want to transform it to some kind of other scale or maybe some question. So, we can do it in that way. Coding. Coding of this particular data is something where we assign some kind of numerical value or the symbol to that particular response. It must process the characteristics of exhaustiveness and mutual exclusivity. So, whenever you give coding, so the coding is to be done in such a way that those assigned values are distinctly different. Coding is necessary for some sort of efficient analysis. Codes the questionnaire choice in the beginning to assist for tabulation. So, this kind of things where for such kind of questionnaire, whenever you make those kind of questionnaire, there itself you can code those kind of information. Say the other day we have seen about the census questionnaire. So, there if you recall that there were certain kind of questions where there was certain code available, like if it is something like married, you give 1, or unmarried give 2, and then if it is like separated give 3, something like that, so that it can be used during taking the response in a quick time. Or else this kind of coding can be done later on as well, where we entered say male, female, or maybe other gender like 0, 1, 3, 2, whatever values or the age group that we also have discussed earlier. So we give a code which will help us to do the analysis in a effective way. Next is the classification, where you have set of information and you have to cluster those information. So in this case it is the process of arranging data in groups or classes based on common characteristics. Say for example, common characteristics can be descriptive like literacy rate, then the sex or the gender, or it can be numerical, it can be also the age, weight, income, etc. Data can be classified according to the class intervals. So whatever we have those kind of values, the lower limit and the upper limit and the intervals we can classify. So say for example, if you want to measure say spot speed of vehicles on a highway, so in that case you can just can measure the spot speed, and then you try to classify them into some group intervals. So in that case you can say that 0 to 20 kilometer per hour, 20 to 40 kilometer per hour, 40 to 60 kilometer per hour, and 60 to 80 kilometer per hour. And then if you measure say 100 such speed data, and you can say that 0 to 20 is 8, and then this is 20, this is say 12, and mostly what you find that in this particular case 60 out of 100 vehicles are achieving the spot speed into that category. So this is classified into that interval, where these are like uniform intervals. It may not be in like uniform interval, but this is some sort of classification you can do. The other classification, definitely if you consider a particular intersection and then you try to find out the turning movement, that it can be a straight, it can be a left, it can be a right movement, and then you measure it for different kind of vehicles. So for car, bus, two-wheeler, auto, and then you can classify that in a particular table. So it may be left, it is right, and it is straight, and a different direction. So definitely from A to B. So if you give a name A, B, C, D, so A to B, how it is moving. So A to B is nothing but the right movement. So like that you can classify your data. Tabulation is very important part of the data processing exercise. This is the procedure to arrange the assembled data in concise and logical order. It conserves the space, reduce explanatory and descriptive statement to a minimum. So here it is everything in a tabulated form. It facilitates the process of comparison. It also assists in summation of the items and the detection of the errors and omissions. So whenever you tabulate the entire data, you can see that where the data is outlier, where maybe the ranges are like within 100, okay, say 50 to 100, and some values you are getting is something like 900. That might be a mistake while entering the data and all, but in the tabulation you can get it. So to find out those kind of outliers in the analysis and all, so tabulation can help you. So this provides a basis for various statistical computational exercise. So tabulation is very important, where you classify the data, you code the data, and then finally you tabulate. Next is the graphical representation. So it helps to understand the data very easily, because tables may look complicated, but the resultant might, in terms of a graph, a bar chart, a pie chart, there are many ways you can represent those information. So definitely in our upcoming lectures I'll also talk about that, the different methods by which, or different kind of graphs or different representation which will convey your results in a very effective manner. Data can be represented using wide range of graphs. It can be a bar chart, it can be a line chart, it can be a multiple bars, pie chart, even in that case you can also have different kind of plot. So box plot is one of them, where it is not only showing those kind of mid value, it can also represent some sort of outliers and all. So we'll discuss that when we discuss the data interpretation and understanding the data, what kind of graph can be used. There it will be much more clear, but the representation of data is also important stage of data processing. Data cleaning. So this is something, checking the data for consistency and treatment for missing value in an extensive manner. In some cases, there are different algorithm by which you can also do the analysis for the missing value. You can generate the missing value by the trend, or else you have to totally remove that particular data set. Consistency check, look for inconsistent data or outliers which can be discarded or replaced by mean value. So in some cases, as I mentioned, that if the value is not there or it is an outlier, we can go for the mean or median depending on the type of analysis, whether you go for a ordinal or interval data, whether you go for a parametric or non-parametric data analysis, you will select the way. Extreme values or outliers are not always erroneous, so that we need to understand. It's not that some values are extreme, so it is not always erroneous. We have to take a call on that. In place of missing value, neutral value which may be the mean of available values can be used. So that's why, like in some cases, if the value is something is totally outlier or missing, we should not simply delete it. That can also be like assume it to be the mean value, but depending on the need of the research and the purpose, it will be decided. Data adjusting is another process. It is not always required to adjust it, but it improves the quality of analysis sometimes. So where you can do some sort of transformation. Weight assigning method is something where it assign the weight to each respondent, or in this case, like to reflect its importance relative to others. So somewhere you can give certain weightages to those respondent, and then you create that kind of weighted responses. Variable respecification method involves creating a new variables or modifying existing variables. So sometimes if you have two variables measured, and then probably in your analysis you want something to be combined, so you can take two variables and represent one. Say for example, if you have for a spatial analysis, you have the population data separately, you have area separately. So out of that you can create a new variable which is called population density, which is population by the area. So in such case, like you create a new variable out of the data and you use it. So that is possible. Or else you can modify the data with certain kind of scale, like probably you have collected in certain form and now you want it into another form, so you can transform it. To ensure the comparability with other scale or to make the data suitable for the analysis, this scale transformation method is very useful and it is being used, right. So you can sometimes having the data, you go for some sort of normalization, you can transform it to a mean max transformation, where you convert those kind of raw values to a scale value for your analysis purpose. Sometimes log transformation is taken into certain case. I'll show you some examples later on in our discussion in this course, that in some cases we have to transform those values to a log transformation, which will be useful to measure certain sort of indicators for certain study. So data adjusting is also possible, but data adjusting doesn't mean that you have to do some manipulation. You will just create a synthetic data, you can just create a data which will fit better the model. It is not. So transformation is happening because that particular algorithm needs that kind of input that you can do. somewhere if some weightage is to be given to those kind of responses, that you can do, because this is a uniform to all. And then definitely if there is some sort of previously we have seen that we have discussed about, if there is missing data, you can also take the mean value or the tendency, central tendency of those kind of data set to just include it, right. So it is not always that you have to discard those values, or suppose say for example you are having the neutral value in your responses. In earlier class we have discussed about that people may say that okay, I am neutral, I am not saying I am dissatisfied or I am satisfied. So in that particular case, with those kind of neutral points, you should not delete it or remove it from your database, so that you want something, some answer should be there. So in such cases definitely you have to consider those input as well. Now problems in data processing, exactly what I mentioned earlier, it's that the problem concerning don't know responses. Maybe when you have a small sample where this kind of don't know responses group is still okay, it has maybe a little significance. But when it is a big data set and you have maximum question don't know, there is no such answer received, so it will be very difficult. In such cases, either the respondent may not know how to answer it, or the researcher may fail to obtaining the appropriate information. The questionnaire was not very clear. That is why the questionnaire design is a very crucial role. So I advise you spend time on it. You ask yourself that questions. You can ask somebody who are not from technical background that whether that question is logical, and based on that question what kind of answer that he or she is giving. So whether for those kind of questions, like especially when you go for a close ended questionnaire, things are still under control. But if it is open ended, then maybe that may lead to a different direction. So open ended question should be very clearly asked, so that the intended answer or the assumed answer should be within the range of consideration. Best way to deal with all these kind of issues, design a better type of question. So you should look into the questionnaire that previously done, and then try to understand, if say you have opportunity to interact with your other scholar around you and all, so you understand their problems, what they faced during the interview with that. So gradually you will understand that okay, what type of question to be framed, so that you can get the intended answer, or maybe there should not be such kind of ambiguity in explaining the questions, as well as responding to those questions by the respondents, right. So I'll also share some of such kind of experience with the case studies, that okay, what kind of difficulties we faced during that kind of data collection, how we overcome that, how we have modified those kind of questions which were not very easy to interpret by the respondent, and then how we overcome that particular part in our study. So here we are ending this particular discussion. So in this case we have discussed the processing of data, how important it is, and how important it is for a researcher to get some good analysis. And this is the, you can say that it is something prerequisite to analyze the results or analyze that particular data with your model. So at this stage, whatever the ambiguity in the data set, any errors, any incompleteness, any inconsistency, that should be checked, and then a final refined data set should be used for your analysis. But with that particular aspect, I would again like to mention that adjustment does not mean, or the refinement does not mean that you modify everything, whatever the data you have collected from the field, and you are modifying to get the synthesized result. That is not ethical, and that is not a good sign for a researcher. So whatever data you have collected, out of that, in a logical way, you have to process it and then use it for your analysis. Then stages of processing data, starting from your cleaning of the data, editing, then tabulation, then the adjusting if required, transformation, those kind of things you can do. And the problems is definitely with the don't know options, or maybe if you get something at mostly the neutral value. So for that, spend time on designing the questionnaire, look at the other questionnaires, and then get certain idea that what to do with your questionnaire, so that you will not face such kind of difficulty while conducting your survey and then post processing of those collected information. So these are the further readings and all already I shared in my previous lectures, and go through this. So next we'll have very important lecture, that is on interpreting the data. When you have data, before analyzing, initial analysis about the frequency, about the central tendency, etc., etc., how you interpret those kind of information, and which will give you some sort of initial indication about overall data and the findings. So we'll be discussing in our next lecture. So thank you for joining this course. Hope you are enjoying it, and then all this discussion and the lectures are going to help you in conducting your research in planning and architecture in an effective manner. So if you have any questions, write back to me. We'll interact and we'll solve your doubt. Thank you. We'll be meeting in our next lecture very soon.